Now, it's probably worth our taking a couple minutes just to hone in on what makes sexual harassment wrong. What about sexual harassment makes it morally wrong to sexually harass somebody? What are the wrong making elements of sexual harassment? And maybe one way to see it is by comparing and contrasting, let's say, rape and the sexual harassment. I guess rape could be sexual harassment. I guess if in the workplace you're constantly you're raped by a coworker or by your boss on a regular basis, and it happens often. I guess that is sexual harassment. It seems though that if we're going to compare rape and an ordinary case of sexual harassment, where somebody perhaps makes lewd comments about uh, their intentions of what they would like to do with you sexually and stuff that you don't want to hear. Um, when we're considering it, it's a kind of a funny question to say, are they equally wrong? You say, well, but wait a second, they're wrong. How do you measure this? But I think to some extent we can understand that certain wrongs are a lot worse than others. For example, if we compare, let's say, somebody uh, punching you in the face to somebody killing you, I'm assuming punching you in the face just punches you. It just hurts. Doesn't even knock you out. Gives you a little black and blue mark. Maybe we'll say, well, you recover from one, maybe the punch in the face. You don't recover from murder. So murder is a lot wrong. It's a lot more wrong than just. It's a lot worse case than um, than being punched by somebody without their permission. God knows why you'd give them their permission. But in the same way that rape seems like more wrong, like the same way murder seems more wrong than just somebody verbally, let's say, harassing you. But then the question is, is there something similar? Are they wrong for the same kinds of reasons? Is there something about rape and sexual harassment that they share in common? And maybe there are some elements. Let's think about some of the elements of what goes into sexual harassment. You know, notice, and this is one that comes in rape also. First of all, power. That is, somebody overpowers the other person. The other one person wants to resist, but does not have the ability, the power to resist. And oftentimes in the definition, or I shouldn't say oftentimes, in a bunch of the definitions that we considered at the begin that Holmes considered at the beginning of his chapter, a lot of them were talking about cases where there was unequal power. That is a supervisor over a subordinate. That is, there was something that they held, or a boss over an employee, where you have the power of the purse. You're holding over, the person's living. Oh, you hold the power to hold that back, so you're in a more powerful position. And in fact, in the movie Disclosure that we saw, they specifically talked about it. Catherine Alvarez, Tom Sanders' lawyer, in discussing it with Tom Sanders' wife, said, that it's about, or sorry, to Tom Sanders, she said initially, it's about power. It's not about so much about sex, but it's the idea of unequal power. Now you're thinking about, what does unequal mean? I mean, typically we think of a boss has more power over the employee than the employee does. The employee don't needs the check. They need their salary to keep themselves, their livelihood to keep themselves going, to pay their bills, etc. So we think that that's unequal power when somebody has a lot more power. But can it be the case that someone, I mean, if we think of blackmail, sometimes the person in a less strong position nonetheless is able to blackmail a person. But then again, the person doesn't, they're not in a position of equal power. But notice, the equal power no longer means that one is in a superior social economic status than the other. It could very well be just one holds some power over the other, I should say. Now, another element that comes in, and shared by rape and sexual harassment, has to do with consent. One thing about rape is that there is no consent. One person is having sex with the other one does not give their consent. In fact, the person didn't ask for consent, didn't want consent, didn't care about consent. Similarly, in cases of sexual harassment, there is a lack of consent. The person, if you're you're propositioning somebody incessantly, continuously, and the person doesn't want to hear it anymore, doesn't want to hear about what you want to do sexually with them, they've had enough. They're not giving you consent to continue making these proposals to them, and but the idea of consent is really a difficult one. That is, the question is comes up is has to do with, is intent required for consent? That is, where things are just kind of happening, even though maybe you take the signals the wrong way. It's in a romantic encounter and you're a friendly encounter, and you think the friendly encounter is going in a more intimate way. Nice way of putting it. But it isn't. Do you intend to harass the person? Do you intend, or do you think the person has consent? And that's one of the reasons that consent's kind of a tough one. And then the question is, to what extent does intent really factor in? Is the person intending to continue this kind of behavior, whether the person likes it or gives consent to it or not? I mean, they're kind of tough concepts, and they're tough issues to discuss. Okay, so those are some of the elements. One thing that's worthwhile taking a look at is, let's take a look at, there are some elements of the law. And let me just mention one. I'll mention another one at the end, but there are different kinds of discriminations in the workplace that are recognized by law, having to do with power differential. Some have, some don't. But there's something that's called quid pro quo harassment. Okay, quid pro quo. We've heard that relating to to questions of impropriety in government. That there's a quid pro quo, that somebody in government is doing something, expecting something in return. For instance, the corrupt politician is putting a law through because the other person has given them some money. So they'd give them their money, or they give them money to their campaign, and the quid pro quo was they're going to get some advantage. So the idea is, it's a job advantage or withholding a job benefit, that being threatened for a failure to comply with sex overtures, overture of sex. That's quid pro quo harassment. The idea is, you can continue working here as long as you keep having sex with me. So that's a form of sexual harassment, but it's called quid pro quo harassment. There are other harassments, and quid pro quo usually happens when there is some kind of sexual relationship, but there's something they call hostile environment harassment, kind of defined as sexual harassment creates a hostile work environment without any demonstrated job detriment. That is, the person keeps, you have a coworker and they keep on telling you about their sexual fantasies with you, and you don't want to hear about it, and they're constantly harassing you about it. It might not even be affecting you in the workplace. It might be in downtime that they're talking about, but you just don't want to hear it anymore. That's something that the law sees as being a hostile environment harassment, and that's how they define it. And, there are other types of sexual harassment not based on any power differential. Notice in both the quid pro quo case, the person has power over the other one. The person has sort of given a bribe and is expecting something in return. So they've already given it. They're expecting, they now have power to get it back from you. Same thing, hostile environment. They keep on telling you things. You have no way to stop them from this verbal harassment. Okay, but there are other kinds of sexual harassment that happens, and this is one that comes up. And the reason I'm bringing this up is these are issues in business relationships. And since this is, of course, about ethical problems in business and society, sometimes it's it can be a peer, and it could be a client or a customer or a patient harassing the service provider or the salesperson, etc. That is, they go in, they ask them, they're attracted to the person behind the counter, and they keep harassing them. So these are three types of discrimination in the workplace that are recognized. These are recognized types of sexual harassment. So I think we're getting a better idea of what can constitute sexual harassment, even if we don't have a good definition. Are there going to be gray areas? Sure, but there are going to be ones that we can say definitely fit the pattern. Some don't fit the pattern, and now we're going to turn to trying to see what exactly, on what theory are these things, according to what theory is sexual harassment wrong? What makes it wrong?